This podcast is brought to you by Archimed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of Archimed.
And I'm Caroline Squatrigo, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-size company culture. Join us.
So, Caroline, who's our special guest today?
Today, we're going to be joined by Archimed's CEO, Jon Desalvo, and he'll be speaking with his father-in-law, Tim Lee. Tim was the executive vice president for global manufacturing for General Motors and chairman for GM China. Now, currently, Tim is the co-founder of Hawksbill Group, a global consulting firm. So I have a feeling he has a lot of good stories for us.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear Jon and Tim interact. This will be a lot of fun. So let's listen in.
Hello, I am Jon Desalvo, President and CEO of Archimed, and I am happy to be joined today by Timothy Lee, who is also my father-in-law, to be able to record this Father's Day special for our culture thesis. Tim Lee, who I like to refer to as Dad, has spent 45 years with General Motors. And during his career, he was president of GM International Operations. He was an executive vice president of global manufacturing. His time at GM has taken him through many levels of leadership across the United States, Europe, Japan, and China. Since his retirement from GM, he's been busy on board of directors for more than 5 companies. He's co-founder of the Hawksbill Group, which is a firm that focuses on helping corporations and organizations grow and solve complex problems and building lasting brands. Currently, he's chairman of the board for Wejo in the United Kingdom, and in February, he became an independent outside director for Live Oak Mobility SPAC. He will soon be married to his lovely wife and the greatest mother-in-law in the world for 50 years, and that's my shameless plug to my mother-in-law. He has 6 amazing children and 12 busy and energetic grandchildren that keep him very busy in any spare time that he has. I think I would summarize by saying he has done a little bit and seen a little bit over the last 50 years. Did I miss anything?
No, that sounds pretty good, Jon, but you forgot to tell them that I started at General Motors when I was in 6th grade, so I'm not as old as I look.
Absolutely. So I apologize for that. You've been there a long time. So as you know, we've been working on this culture thesis for quite a while. And one of the things that's really important to us as Archimed is to make sure that we're putting the right culture in place. So I've got a couple questions for you today, and I think your insight will add a lot to the journey that we're on. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's start with, you got involved in the manufacturing world over 50 years ago. When you think back about when you started, how did executives and owners discuss culture then? And how would you describe what that culture was like?
Interesting question, Jon, because the word culture never crossed the lips of any executive in the company where I worked until probably 2010 or after that. When I started, which was a long time ago, the culture was basically command and control from the top-down management. The assumption was that management leadership had all the ideas, and that shop floor knowledge was not profound, and it was very much a top-down culture. But the word culture never came up. I doubt that the leaders even could spell the word.
I think you described that pretty well. So you mentioned 2010. When would you say the culture discussion became more mainstream for you and personally?
Well, even the word culture, I don't recall talking much about culture until, I'd say in the 2010 or right around that time frame. Before that, it was more about the work environment. What kind of work environment were you trying to create as a leader? And what kind of performance contribution every person could make in the business? So I would say, in my mind, that led to me thinking more about performance culture. But I would say the word culture really never entered my mind. It was more about identifying the right teammate on the right job, and then clearly describing what the KPIs are for that job so that performance can be met and then exceeded, and then you move the bar going forward. So culture, no, I really didn't think too much in terms of culture until, I'll say, the last 10 or 15 years.
So when you think about the last 10 or 15 years and you think about the formulation of your teams and whether you call it culture or you call it team dynamics or whatever that may be, how did you define that with your team? What goals and objectives did you set when setting that expectation of how that team should interact or the culture that should be created?
Yeah, I mean, every year we would define an operating plan for the plant or for the activity that I was leading, and we would then define the activities that must be executed to make the plan come true. And we finalized and agreed upon what the KPIs would be so that everyone had a set of activities they had to undertake to produce the business results that we're looking for. And then, follow up and make mitigation to the plans if we weren't getting the results that we looked for. But I would say, going back, and as you asked me to think about this, a couple of weeks ago, the real change came in the company General Motors really in the 1990s, early mid 1990s, when Jack Smith was the chairman and CEO of the company, and he hauled four of us young manufacturing leaders up to his office one day, and he wanted to talk about safety. And he was not satisfied with the safety performance of the company. And he told us, he said, I'm going to give you guys 6 months. And if you can't figure out how to fix safety at General Motors in 6 months, I'm going to fire all four of you. Now, he was not exactly 100% serious about firing all four of us, but he made his point. And when we left, safety then became the centerpiece of how we began a transformation on the shop floor in General Motors to bring our people along instead of just using this top-down philosophy. And the focus on safety then became a focus on lean thinking. We had the joint venture with NUMMI, or with Toyota at NUMMI in California, where Tesla is now building cars. And we basically copied the Toyota production system and then systematically implemented the Toyota production system around the world over the course of the next 20 years. So that by the time I retired from the company, every member of the team, from operator to team leader to group leader to superintendent to all the way up to me, would know exactly what their KPIs are, what their performance expectation was. And then I would say we defined our performance culture around that sort of metric definition, and that's how we moved the needle. And when I retired from the company, and John, you know this because you saw it early on, there was only one way to lead on the shop floor in a manufacturing plant at General Motors, and that was by using the basics of the lean system. And the KPIs were identical. The action plans were identical. The only thing that was different plant to plant to plant in terms of the factory environment was the local language, because all of the shop visibility and looking at the plant floor, all of the metrics, et cetera, were identical. Just the language was different, and it was very satisfying then to see how that all came together. Now that's the big picture. I say more than on a small picture, dealing with direct reports. And during that same period of time, it became clear to me that the best team was a diverse team. And when I first started thinking about diversity, I thought about it in the old Myers-Briggs personality profile diversity. I wasn't thinking so much in terms of men or women or African Americans or Hispanics or Asian Americans. I was thinking about diversity in thinking. But it so happened that to get the kind of diverse thinking I was looking for, we always had African Americans on the team, we had women on the team, we had Hispanics on the team. We brought people up from Mexico to be on my staff team because we wanted to have that inclusiveness. And that's really when it all began to click, when we practiced inclusion and eliminated the white male club atmosphere and made it a very inclusive company. And I would say that the current CEO and chairman has just taken that thought and taken it to a completely different level. But Mary started out working for me as an electrical foreman in a plant, and she's come a long way, and she's doing a great job.
So when you, and a wise man once told me, your career is a marathon, not a sprint. And I don't know who that wise man was, but he's definitely been working in manufacturing for 50 plus years. Um, when you think about that journey, how has your philosophy on, and you talked a little bit about how you built teams, how has your philosophy on culture or teams really changed through the years of how you started and how you see things today?
Like I said, when we first started talking early on, it was top down. There really was no culture other than a white male culture of the bosses having all the right ideas. Clearly, over the years, that you have to turn that model completely upside down. The focus of an organization has to be on the value adders. Who adds value? I mean, leadership doesn't add value. Leadership does two things: allocate resources or motivate slash demotivate the troops. That's all leadership does. Value is added on the shop floor, value is added in distribution, and value is added in sales. So you have to turn that organization upside down and focus resources where value is added and make sure that there are no roadblocks for those who are adding value to the product or the service that you're delivering. And having a diverse leadership team makes all the difference.
So when you think about your upbringing, growing up on Lake Erie, simple town, Lorain, Ohio, uh, starting a family at a very young age, and now seeing it grow. What impact has the family's culture had on your approach and how you shape the way you formulate your teams and the way you handle things in the business world?
I was taught growing up that there's no substitute for hard work. You don't have to be the sharpest tool in the toolkit, but if you work harder than everybody else, you can make a difference. And so my dad taught me that, my mom taught me that: work hard and good things will happen. So I've always believed in that. I've always uh, been an early riser in the morning, and I find the time in the morning really helpful to get my thoughts together, and then just dive into the day and try to work as hard as I can to accomplish whatever I want to get done. I hope I've taught that to all of my children, and of course, with the help of my wife doing that. Um, I think they all work hard. I think they've seen that leadership by example from their mother and from their father, and they all work very, very hard. They all work very, very hard through school. Uh, to some degree or another. Um, and they've all worked very, very hard in college, and then once they've found their careers. But John, every individual is different. You have to practice situational leadership. You can't treat everybody the same way. You have to carve and craft your relationship with individuals based on who they are and where they're from. Same thing with kids. I mean, all the kids are different. Um, you know that. You see them all the time. Um, and you have to sort of craft your parenthood to match the personality of the individual children. You know that as a parent. Julie and Dominic are very, very different, but they're great kids.
Thanks for that. And yeah, it's I think that a lot of us have that, how we grew up, what was instilled in us comes out in the culture or the teams that we build. And with your success and the amount of, not only culture building, but truly different cultures that you've been in across your career, and the different countries and different approaches. Was there ever like this aha moment, or about how to create teams, or someone that was a mentor or that guided you towards something that you saw that gave and shaped uh, your career, and how you did that?
Well, the one thing that struck me, I left Flint, Michigan as a plant manager and took most of the family to Japan for a 3-year assignment in 1996. And when I left the plant that I was the plant manager, I mean, my staff was women, 3 women, 2 African Americans, one Hispanic guy, and I think 2 or 3 white males. We had a really, really good group. We had an old factory, but we produced incredible results, particularly in the area quality, producing the Buick LeSabre and the Olds 88 in large volumes, tack time of 60 seconds, uh, a lot of cars 60 cars per hour, 1,000 cars per day. And we did, I think, a really good job. I went to Japan, and Japan is run, and still is today, as an old boy network. There are no women, I mean, no women in leadership positions in Japan. And while I was there, I was the lead director at Isuzu for General Motors. GM owned 40% of the shares of Isuzu at the time. I actually uh, brought a woman over to lead the purchasing activity at Isuzu. And this was like the most shocking development that they had ever seen. But I think they all learned that she was actually quite capable and did a terrific job. But she was the single and only woman who wasn't just a secretary or an admin in the entire company. Um, and that struck me as really, really interesting and very cultural in Japan, but also very limiting. So you think of the Japanese and you think, oh my gosh, they're so good at continuous improvement. They're so good at high quality. They're terrible at innovation. They're terrible at idea generation. Um, they just don't get the flavor of all different viewpoints at the table. They only get the viewpoint of the old boy network. So they're very good at continuous improvement, but you give them a blank piece of paper and ask them to solve a problem, they really struggle with that. And I think it's because of lack of diversity. Then on the other hand, when I went to China 15 years later, women in China are very involved and very active as executives throughout the company structures in which I was working, and you can see it in the culture. Very, very, very different. And China's only a couple hundred miles away from Japan, but the stark difference in the cultures was just amazing. And I think you can see now the results coming out of China reflect an organization or a country that performs pretty well and innovates very, very well. And I think it's a cultural comparison with Japan.
So you gave a really good example of a directive that you were given as a team member, from a safety standpoint. Sometimes when you think about culture and the importance around a team, um, to do the right thing can sometimes be costly. Has there ever been a time where you had to make a decision because of support of the team, or just doing what was right, that was costly? And can you share a story about that?
Sure, I can think of two that come right to mind, and they both involved men who, just a moment of ultimate regret, ran their mouth and talked badly about women in an open forum, and behaved inappropriately. And I had to disciplined both. One I actually removed from the company, and the other I had to penalize significantly on a financial point of view. Both guys really, really great contributors. I mean, they were guys who got results, but you cannot set a tone at the top, which is incredibly important, John. You know that as president and CEO of Archimet, you set the tone at the top. And then if bad things happen along the way, you can't ignore them. You have to step up to them and address them. So those are very, very difficult. And then when I was in Shanghai and I had responsibility for all of the countries as president of GM International Operations, we had an issue in one of our countries where the leadership in the country and engineers in the country, powertrain engineers back in Detroit had colluded to basically fuzz up some results on some testing. And I had just replaced the managing director of India with a new guy, and he discovered this and he came to me and I told him, I said, look, you just have to figure out what happened. And then we're just going to have to let the chips fall where they may. Because if we set the tone at the top that we're going to be a compliant organization and we're going to comply with all of the laws and regulations of every country in which we operate, you cannot tolerate anyone going across the line. So again, we had to find where the mistakes were made, and we had to ultimately separate a number of people from the company who had used incredibly bad judgment. And that's really, really hard to do when you know these people, you've worked with them for a long time, but you cannot tolerate that kind of behavior.
So sadly, as humans, we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. During your journey, was there ever a time where you missed it on culture, or thought the team or the organization was ready for something, and they just weren't?
Yeah, and again, I'll give an example back to my time in China. We had a recognition program for the best dealers in our region, the best dealers in China, the best dealers in India, the best dealers in Russia or South Africa. And we would have a conclave once a year where, we had everybody together. And we had one of those sessions in New York City, and it was a lovely venue. And at one point, one of the very, very best dealers in China came up to me and, in his own fractured English, told me basically that I was making a big mistake by not spending more time in the stores in China, which in my mind, I knew that was true, but I had sort of delegated that to others who were in the sales department, and I wasn't spending a lot of time in the stores. And he said that in his culture, the person at the top of the company should always try to get close to the customer and create a relationship with his dealers or her dealers that would enable him to go see customers on a regular basis and interact with customers and recognize that the customer is where it all starts in the business of selling transportation. So I had to take a lesson there and say, he's right. I wasn't doing the right thing by delegating all that. I should have been closer to the dealers. I should have been closer to the customers. And for the last couple of years of my tenure there, that's exactly what I did.
Hey, did you enjoy that once you started doing it?
Yeah, it was actually a revelation because not only did I get a chance to see the customers face to face during the moment of truth when they're transacting to buy a product, I also had a chance to go back into the back of the shops to look at the service activities and see what was going wrong. And one of the things that Fritz Henderson taught me to do a long time ago was to find out where the return parts department was and make sure you go into the return parts crib to see what kind of parts were in there. And that's very revealing, John, when you actually see what's going wrong and you make a couple phone calls and you get things fixed pretty quickly.
Absolutely. As you're reaching out and to our listeners, and of course, I get the pleasure of getting all of this advice on a regular basis. But if you can give two pieces of advice to leaders or people that are listening to this podcast about culture and creating culture, what are two things that you would deem most important?
I would say that creating a performance-based culture that practices inclusion, John, is number one. And to do that, you have to have a clear plan. You have to have uh, activities defined, and you have to have KPIs, and then holding people accountable to deliver the proper business result. It's not unfair to expect people to perform. And then when they don't, help them understand what must be true for them to perform. And ultimately, then, if they can't, find either another assignment for them or ask them to leave the company.
Well, I've truly enjoyed this. I hope you did too. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to share these thoughts with our listeners. I'm spoiled. I get this all the time, sometimes whether I want it or not. Uh, but I value our relationship. I look up to you in every success that you've had, and I really appreciate you doing this. It means a lot to me.
Hey, John, thank you very much. The feelings go both ways. You're a great son-in-law, but just remember this, after 25 years, you're still on probation.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Thanks again, Dad. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Man, Tim is quite an accomplished individual. In preparing for this podcast episode, I read a press release from 2013. When Tim was appointed chairman of GM China, he had responsibility for something like 12 joint ventures, a couple foreign enterprises, and some 55,000 employees. And I know that it's grown drastically since then. And it's really just incredible the progress that he has produced for GM over his career.
Yeah, well, first of all, I loved hearing from someone who has that type of experience. And it's also just fun to hear Jon interact with his father-in-law. I don't know if you guys were able to catch on, but Jon's quite a character. So I like listening to him interact with family members who maybe have a little bit more dirt on him than we do at the office. But it's very clear that, Jon admires Tim a lot, and they have a good mutual respect. It sounds like they talk about this stuff kind of frequently.
Yeah, that's great to feel and hear. I think Archimed as an organization obviously benefits from Jon as the CEO, and through that benefits from Tim. And so in a sense, all of our employees, each one of us, benefit from Tim's advice through Jon. Wow, I was really flabbergasted when Tim said that GM executives never mentioned the word culture until at least 2010. Wow.
Yeah, I was also surprised. We've heard from a couple of people at this point who've talked a lot about when culture first kind of came onto the scene. And I think for a lot of places, it was well before 2010. But, for Tim and for GM, that was the year. And it sounds like at that time, there was this very strong belief that, shop floor knowledge or really knowledge of anyone not on the leadership team was just not profound. It was not to be listened to or acted upon. It was very, dictator-like, top-down, authoritarian style. And apparently, all good ideas came from the executive suite. So very different from how we're used to running things, and interesting to hear about that approach.
Yeah, in this day and age, and compared to what we are learning on this journey of ours, Tim's presentation of the concept of culture at GM during his time there, at least during the first part of his time there, really presents quite a dichotomy. And it sounds like Tim and his peers were, if not the first, close to being the first generation to start to change that GM culture for the better.
Yeah, to me, it sounds a lot like they were very focused on performance. They wanted to identify operating plans, goals, objectives, focus on the teams, determine the KPIs, prove success, move the needle, and then move on. The people part was not really part of the equation. And like you said, Greg, it sounds like as Tim came into a more of a leadership role, he picked up on that and maybe made some moves to change that.
Yeah, I love the culture of performance. I think it goes back to that culture of achievement that Tom Peck discussed. And we obviously have that here at Archimed, and I love that. We managed through our OKR system, so that's a lot of accountability. But GM's culture was one of clear communication and achievement. So everybody knew what the KPIs were, everybody had agreed to the KPIs, everybody knew what they needed to do to achieve those KPIs. So it's not just performance, but it's also clear communication. Tim really made that point clear to us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they were honest too. I mean, I think resignation was thrown around a lot if you didn't you weren't meeting those KPIs. So I think there were no minced words about here's what we need to do and figure out a way to make it happen. But it was nice to hear the story Tim talked about in the 1990s about, you know, working to eliminate the white male club and pursuing diversity of thought and opinions, which then turned into diversity of backgrounds and experiences. And it seems that, you know, Tim sees this as a lever that allowed for everything at GM to click. It was almost like that missing piece where they weren't focusing enough on getting more people into the conversation.
Yeah, and I admired Tim's decision that he talked about in one of his stories to discipline and even to remove employees who did not adhere to the ethical standards that he had set out as an executive and that GM had set up. And that's including a high performer's dismissal when he mistreated a female colleague. I really respect that.
Yeah, and also, you know, there was the story about the manager who kind of maybe embellished on some numbers. and you know, it sounds like he dealt with that pretty clearly and swiftly, which again, I think it's a hard thing to do, but admirable that he was able to do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of our discussion with Phil Kinney and Tim Fort and others about ethical behaviors and the costs and benefits of behaving ethically in business.
Yeah, the other thing that he really hit on was, you know, he spent a lot of time in China and he talked about he needed to learn the lesson to spend more time in the stores in China. You know, he'd been having another individual kind of do that for him, and it was pointed out he really needed to be there himself to get that feel. And I think that really relates to Archimed's cultural tenet of, you know, walking the floor, no matter who you are, no matter what job you hold, get out on the shop floor and learn what's really happening out there.
Yeah, that's part of our culture. It's not part of every manufacturing company's culture. So you and I recently have begun to try to acclimate new hires to that aspect so that there's less of a culture shock when they realize our expectation is that you leave your office and you walk the floor and you interact. I also like the way Tim put leadership. You know, our job as leaders is to allocate resources and to motivate, and the value, all the value is really added on the shop floor. And going back to your comment, Caroline, about diversity, and Tim says a diverse leadership team that moderates its approach based on the individual also sees that the value is produced on the shop floor. And so motivating those folks makes a difference in achieving success. So a diverse leadership team tailoring their approach based on the individual and acknowledging the value that exists on the shop floor. That seems to be the key.
Yeah, and I mean, he also said this quote that I think resonated with both of us, and that's, it's not unfair to expect people to perform. You know, we are here to do a job, and I think there's leadership side of, like you said, motivating or demotivating, providing resources, all of that. But the flip side of that is, you know, you should have clear expectations, and I think that helps drive performance.
Yeah, and that's culture of accountability. Hard to argue with that.
Yeah, agreed. But I mean, I loved this interview. I think it was really fun to listen in on, and it's fun to be doing this little Father's Day series.
Absolutely. This is part 3 of 4 for the month. Happy Father's Day.
Next time, we'll be joined by Greg's dad, Mickey Maurer, and also Greg's daughter, Sophie Maurer.